What's up, everyone? It's Friday, and it's a special Friday here because I've got a dunking coffee. No, it's not. It's because guess who's here? Phil. And I was really hoping he was going to sit on that side of the desk because I want to stay away from the coronavirus. I'm joking. Phil quarantined himself when we first went into this whole quarantine period because his partner is an ER, works in the emergency response department of the hospital. But they've had no real, like it's been a letdown.
Yeah, it's been
a no-show. There's been no corona cases.
Well, there's been some, but it's just been like so not as big as everyone expected. Yeah. So, which is very fortunate for Australia. Not to say that I think everyone should just go back to normal things, but I could probably pop in for a Physio Friday and say hi to everyone.
Nice. Well, we miss him. So we're going to be getting into, Phil's going to be talking about his digital physiotherapy sessions that he can do and answering any questions that any of you have. And if any of you don't have questions, I'm going to be asking them because my body feels wrecked after these at-home workouts this week.
We're just quickly shout out to Grace Clement. She's saying, morning guys, and welcome back, Phil, with a big smiley face. Steve Cavana saying, yay, Aiden Potts, Phil, the thrill. Good to have you back, brother.
That is a new one. I haven't done that.
Yeah, that's awesome. We got a couple of physios in the house today, actually. We got some guys from the GWS Giants filming exercise videos out in the gym for an app to help people move during COVID-19, so that's very exciting too.
I actually missed having.
For those of you in America or Europe tuning in, GWS are part of the AFL, Australian Football League, which is kind of like NFL, I guess, in America.
I mean,
no, not really. It's just it's football.
No, but the equivalent. It's the equivalent. Yeah. It's as popular here in Australia
mostly in the southern states outside of New South Wales, but anyway.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, and in Western Australia too.
Yeah, if you haven't seen it, definitely check it out.
Yeah.
But the podcast part of me is kind of stressed out about this introduction where there hasn't been a cut to the bumper, so I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to do with editing the podcast later on. But new format today. That's all right. Special occasion.
We sort of fluffed it a little bit there.
No.
So how have you been, man?
It has been a strange time. It's just been really weird being at home and seeing the inside of a building that's not my house or a supermarket is like quite exciting. It's like thrilling for the senses to just have like different stimulus. But no, it's been not great. I really like working here with you guys and definitely feeling the loneliness of being at home, I think. But when you go down to, I've been still into my swimming and surfing and running around, and you go to Manly and it feels like there's no pandemic going on. It's like when it's such beautiful weather outside and people are exercising, it's like it's been fun.
What I find strange is that every time I go outside, I really feel like I'm like breaking the law, like I'm doing something really bad, And even if I'm just making a trip straight to the supermarket and back, that's right. Yeah, but I haven't been to a beach or anything like that in months,
I've been pretty strict about it. Like I've stay at home all day, and then at 5 o'clock I go for like a sunset thing, and then I like get back in the house. So haven't been coming in here, but it's nice to be here. It's been a busy time trying to get all my relearn how to do my profession online, which is like something I was planning to do anyway, but this really forced the issue. And it's been good. Had a few consultations, some of the people on the from the Unity group and some others. So it's been good so far. And recording a few podcast episodes for my new physio interview podcast, and also then organising my podcast I'm doing for patients about how to not see me, basically.
So very quickly, guys, before we go any further, we got a bunch of people on the live. If you've got any questions about, and I noticed that Carmine's jumped in, which is fantastic. If you've got any questions for Phil about any sort of niggles, issues, injuries, things that you've wanted to ask us but we've failed you on, now's the time to get them in. And also, for those of you who are watching the live stream, just give us a comment, let us know who's there and where you're tuning in from. We like to know that we're talking to people, not a camera.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what's the format? Explain to us how it works, an online consultation.
Yeah, so part of, I guess, the big place to start is that I have rebranded. Ta-da!
Switched on Physio. I've been
I know you've been calling it that for a while, but I haven't done like the official launch. So we'll call this the official launch, where I'm trying to move away from my name as brand to try and build something that I can potentially have more people involved with in the future. So the brand and the website's called switchedon.physio, so it's not .com, it's .physio. So maybe while you're there, just have a little look and see what I've been up to. But yeah, it's I decided on the name before the whole pandemic hit and everyone into lockdown, but it kind of works well with like the switched online. So kind of switching your thinking about how you're interacting with physios, and the idea is that physio is so much about, like, physiotherapy is a profession, it's not a treatment in itself, so it's very much about what the patient is doing in the experience. So you've got to be really like switched on to doing something when you've got to be interacting with the physio. You've got to be really taking control of your own body and using the physiotherapist as a kind of health consultant, a body consultant to get you doing things. And at the same time, like, I really like the idea of a physio being switched on, because it's a ever changing profession, and there's constantly new research coming out and different ways of people like suddenly like things change from being a very much like hands-on kind of treatment profession and to a exercise prescription one, and you've really got to stay up to date with what's happening in the profession. So I like the idea of being fairly switched on and changing and keeping up to date with what's going on.
We had a discussion, I think, on yesterday's show or the day before, about being switched on, about being up to date with the most current research, because someone was talking about how they'd hurt themselves and they were just currently icing it and listed off the old rice sort of thing, basically. And I was trying to be educated and say, I think that's the old way of doing things now. And I was trying to remember the LOVE acronym.
Peace and love.
Peace and love. And Grace Clements actually dived in, and she did remind us of the peace and love, but I didn't really know how to apply it, so we didn't talk about it.
Yeah. I mean, that's the whole thing about it. Hey, like you learn about the body for your whole life, and you learn one thing, and then suddenly it's like everything's kind of constantly morphing, and you've got to stay up to date. So yeah, liked that. I land on that brand name, and I think it fits fairly well. So, but yeah, how it basically works is if you go onto my website, I've got a How Does Online Physio Work tab that you go to, and it gives you a step-by-step on the whole process. I basically, instead of doing like a conventional physiotherapy appointment where you come in and you get an appointment and then you book in your next appointment, and then that kind of keeps on. You have like just these distinct one-off appointments. You actually go with packages. So the way that works is you fill out an online form that gets most of your information down, so you can condense the video appointment to actually talking about really what you want to achieve, more about your goals, and clarifying a few things in the history. And then it opens up the availability to have a dialogue throughout the package period. So we've got like a 1 week, a month, or a 3 month where we have an app where I do an exercise prescription program. You get all your exercises, and then you can track your adherence to it. It gives you reminders because often doing the exercises is the hardest part. Yep. You can track your pain levels, and then there's a secure messaging part of that app where if you have any questions, instead of having to book in and pay another $120 or whatever a physiotherapy appointment is, you can just have access to me, and once a day I go on and answer all those questions, and then keep guiding if there's something wrong with a program where it doesn't quite work for you, it's a bit harder than you expected or a bit too easy, then I can adapt that on the fly. And so it's a really nice way of being able to have awesome.
It sounds so much more in depth than the physio appointments that I've had in the past. Like where it's kind of like you go in, they fiddle around with your body a little bit, and then you go out and hope that you feel better, and 9 times out of 10 you don't, so you go back and pay them more money, and I'm like, so wow, it's very rare. And sometimes you'd get at best a scribble on a page about like try and do this.
Yeah, this app is pretty neat where you can get like full-on videos there with descriptions. Your sets and reps are all done. And I'm trying to build up a library of exercises for that at the moment, which fits in well with what you guys are doing. But it takes time, and hopefully as I go on,
it's
it'll all
a process
get better.
That you keep going. I just very quickly, Steve Cavana's jumped in and said, I thought the online consultation with Phil was great. Can definitely recommend to anyone who's not sure if online is right.
Yeah, had a good chat with Steve.
He uses the app, which looks awesome. There you go. We got a question here from Carmine. My serratus anterior on my right side has a small knot by the scapula. What's the best method to loosen it? Been using a lacrosse ball with a weighted band. First of all, why don't you explain to me what a knot is?
Yeah, it's a bit of a funny one, isn't it?
I love this. Get ready, Carmine. You might find... I'd also like to know, how do you know that it's your serratus anterior where it connects to the scapula? Because I certainly would not be able to tell that it was my serratus anterior that I'm feeling if it was around where the
so it's more by the scapula, but like with the serratus anterior, for those who aren't up with their Latin words and their anatomy. Basically, it's a muscle that goes from your rib cage here, and it attaches to the underside of the back of your scapula here, and its job is to try and keep your shoulder blade nice and flush to your rib
You'd be
cage.
able to see it on me, wouldn't you?
For you, bloody rippling with a...
That's it there, isn't it? Is that it?
Serratus in Latin means sore, which is kind of... I love anatomy because the words always tell you something about the structure. So for this instance, it's a sore. So you can see on Rad, you could cut down a bloody...
You can see the teeth of the saw there. Yeah, that's right.
Cut down a tree with that sucker. But yeah, and anterior, so it's at the front here. And yeah, basically its job is to try and keep your shoulder blade flush against your rib cage. So for people who have scapular winging issues, the serratus anterior is the one that's generally not quite doing its job so well. But when it comes down to knots, generally you get like a tightness or a spasm, which is what we'll kind of call a knot here, for a muscle that is basically gone above its threshold of like load capacity. So if you overwork something, or you work something to a point where it's not quite able to handle the load, then that's when you're going to get these kind of long-standing spasms, which is the knot idea. It's not actually a muscle that's tied in a knot, but it's just an area of localized spasm that can come from the macros, so from like your total level of training. So if you've not really done much training and then you've seen, like, you've kind of got addicted to waking up in the morning and seeing Rad just like, in all his glory rippling away, and you just want to follow along, and you suddenly start doing a whole lot more training than you have before, then that's that kind of macro picture. So big picture, you've overloaded it through the total amount that you're doing. But the other thing is the micro loading. So maybe your shoulder mechanics are not ideal, and so your serratus anterior is doing, more work than it ideally would in the whole shoulder system. So it might be a shoulder balance issue. And without kind of getting into, like really specifics for this person, it's hard to say with you on the other side of the screen, but to have a think about those two factors, and maybe it's kind of coming down to either like your total training or look at your shoulder balance. But what you can do about it, I guess, with the if massaging is good, the thing with massage is if it feels good, do it. If it helps, do it. Like it's one of those things. I've been a massage therapist for 7 years now, and like it's you wish there was some like magical explanation of how like friction sort of suddenly makes things better, but really it's just like if it feels good, do it.
And something that I've that's really opened my eyes up to general treatment, like a general approach for basic injuries since we've had you here, and I've been able to just have an open conversation with you about anything that's going on in my body, is that the idea of identifying the weak links in your kinetic chains, like the reasons as to why your body isn't moving so well, and then it becomes quite a simple thing of, okay, well, you need to just work on this and strengthen it. And the problem is that when you don't understand that, you try something, nothing happens. So you try something else, nothing happens. But it takes time for anything to actually happen.
Yeah.
So when you have somebody with your level of knowledge being able to say, well, it's most likely that this is the weak link in your kinetic chain, so you're going to want to do X, Y, and Z exercise for 6 weeks and then reevaluate and see if it's made a change.
Yeah.
And with that approach, I've done things that I overlooked that I thought, well, it's not that because that didn't make it better. But when you reinforced it to me, when you said that actually most likely is what it is, my problems really went
And just
away.
to tie that into my terminology there, that's really talking about that micro-loading idea. So that weak link of the chain is a nice sort of example of that sort of micro-loading thing. And that is a really challenging thing with physio, and something that I find hard, just to be really open with everyone, is like, I want to go in there and make people like feel better straight away. I want to make people like, leave the consultation being like, yeah, I'm fixed, I'm instantly better. But it's the hard thing with physio. Like, it does take time. It's same with training. Like, you've got to, you've got to put in work, and you've got to like test things and see how they go. And you got to like, it just does take some time sometimes. So, if you can get some direction on where you're heading, then that time is well spent.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
So,
sorry, go on.
well, so I was going to say, Carmine, if you actually do an online consultation with Phil, he can go so much deeper with you onto this, because he'll get you to move, and he'll be assessing you and your movement, and you can get a lot more clarity in that. So what has been given to you there is some really general advice, but you can get some much more specific advice if that's a path that you want to go
Just
down.
very quickly, I've got an answer for Lockie Hussar.
Oh,
Hey
you
guys,
got to read out his question.
long time listener, first time caller. My question is, for the brothers, what products do you use to keep your complexion looking so fresh and youthful? Now, that's a great question. It's only one product. It's called UMS. It's a lotion that you apply liberally to your skin on a daily basis. It takes about 60 to 90 minutes of application.
That might be what you use. I've actually got a whole array of products at home. I go through like a 7-stage cleansing and facial moisturizing process in the morning and a 3-stage in the evening.
All that coconut oil you keep buying wasn't
Yeah,
just
and the products have to be squeezed onto his skin by virgins that are sourced from the Himalayan Alps, and they have to be naked whilst they do it.
Moving on.
Yeah, that's right. No, in all seriousness, mate, it's the Bahamas Glow filter that Richard puts over us.
We actually look really pasty and white.
That's right.
Yeah.
So we got a question here from Callum Cassidy, who was on the morning workout. So great work, Callum, for getting over here and joining the group. I don't know if you were prior to this a member of the group or not, but welcome anyway. So Rad, have you got that question? Can you bring that one up?
Yeah, so Callum is saying, I can't throw a side kick or round kick without groin pain. So Phil, that's where you bring your leg up this way. So it definitely requires adductor flexibility. Not sure if it's a flexibility, strength, or mobility problem. Squeezing my glute tends to help, but it's difficult to do quickly. Any ideas? The first thing I want to ask is, before Phil jumps in, Callum, if you can chime in and say, how often are you kicking? What's the rest period between when you kick? So, because it's potentially that you have a bit of an overuse injury going on and you're just not letting it recover. But Phil, do you want to jump in?
And are you kicking something or are you kicking the air?
Yep. Yeah, is that going to make it? Is that?
Okay. I thought you were saying
no.
Because like with your knowledge of kicking, have you?
It could be either. It depends on what he's doing. I'd imagine that he's kicking something. So I'd imagine that he's kicking.
Have you had any experience with groin pain while kicking?
Oh man, so much. So my experience. I mean, I did Kung Fu for 13 years, and I've got a decent kick on me from that amount of time training. And I found it's most commonly with martial arts, it's an overuse injury, and it's trying to do something that your body isn't capable of. I can definitely, if I knew what I know now, I would not have tried to kick so high, and I would have worked more on flexibility and end range strength. So I would have worked more on creating flexibility in the adductors and hamstrings and more on creating end range strength in the glutes and hip flexors to be able to get my leg up easier than I would have spent time trying to kick high. Because because basically, like, if your end range, if the furthest that you can go is to get your leg to here, and you try to kick to there every time, then every single time you do it, you're going to your absolute limit, and that's going to really strain you. But if you develop a range where you can go to here, but you kick to there, it becomes really, really easy.
That's a really important statement to understand, and I just want to chime in and explain why. Because your brain, if you're kicking to your limits, your brain is hardwired to prevent that from occurring, especially in a ballistic movement. Yeah. And this happens to a lot of athletes. When you push your body to the extreme when you're sprinting or changing directions, jumping or kicking, and Phil can probably give you a bit more deeper idea of what's occurring here. But the nervous system is preventing you from harm, and so if your body starts to reach its limit, and we've spoken about this a lot, Carmine, in our flexibility podcasts.
That's Callum,
sorry.
we're talking to here.
Your brain is sending signals back and forth to that limb, to the muscles, to the muscle spindles, and saying, okay, I'm getting close to my limit here. You need to contract and prevent me from going further. But if you've got momentum, inertia behind that, it's going to stretch you beyond the point that your brain can actually prevent. It's not like a static stretch where you stretch to your limit and it gets tight and you just can't go any further. Momentum takes you further. And so you're essentially creating an injury every time you do that. That's what I would suggest.
Yeah, so I guess to get back to your question of like not sure if it's a flexibility, strength, or mobility problem, I think you could think about it as like all of those would be the solution. So more of all of those things would definitely help. Mm-hmm. And the other interesting thing is saying when you're squeezing your glute, it tends to help. But yeah, obviously when you're trying to do free-flowing movement, it's really hard to be like contract glute now. And that's the problem with a lot of this sort of like activation stuff. Like it has to be a automatic thing. It can't be like pre-programmed. Like you can't be like, okay, whenever I kick, I've got to try and tense that really hard to tense thing. So when you think about what's happening when you're kicking, is you've got your hip joint, which is just like your shoulder joint. It's a ball and socket joint, except it's a much more closed down space. So the shoulder is like a very shallow socket, so you have lots of free flowing movement, whereas your hip is quite a closed in joint. So when you're moving your leg around quickly, like the ball has to clear a lot of different range which is quite hard when you've got quite a closed down space. So it's really important to build up the strength and control throughout that full range. So I got a bit off track there because it's really hard when Yanni was chatting. Richie there. I got to be like, whoa, my brain gets. So just to make that a bit more clear. So just like the shoulder, you have to be strong throughout all these ranges. Same thing goes with your hip if you're into that sort of high kicking. So like the stabilize and control work with the external rotators in your hip are what keeps that ball in the middle of the socket. And so when you're squeezing your glutes, what you're doing is you're actually squeezing that whole area, which you're probably doing, you're squeezing the external rotators as well, which act as that structure that keeps the ball in the middle of the socket. So doing some targeted strengthening of those muscles will help just build up that strength, but we also want to make build up that dynamic control, as I talked about. It can't be pre-programmed, so doing some more reactive work, like single leg balance work, and reactive work in different ranges, which I can't really demonstrate in this tiny space, but there's like lots of different activation things that you could try and build up that ability, but then it's like the big picture stuff. It then comes down to applying it to actual kicking, which you definitely do via the way that Rad was talking about there, like with his experience of, if you're able to kick up here, but you only kick here, then you're going to be able to do that a whole lot more, and you'll be able to build up that volume, and you'll be able to build up that tolerance. And just like Yanni said, you're not going to be stressing out your system every time you kick. So as you build your strength, flexibility, and mobility, like if, now you can kick like to head height, kicking to shoulder height should be no problem. So slowly build it up.
And I'm going to quickly, because Callum's given us another little bit of feedback here, I'm going to read this and then I've got something else to add to it. So Callum's saying, I haven't been kicking very frequently recently due to the COVID-19. I thought I'd use this time to overcome the issue. When I was younger, I could kick head height with both legs. Now I force my right leg up into the position but simply can't with my left. The issue started on the left side of my groin when throwing a side kick. Listen, man, this is something that happens when you age, and this is really a really hard conversation to have with people. And I've been told in the past that I'm quite heartless when I do this. So I'm going to do my best to not be heartless. But
you heard it first here.
Yanni's told me many times that I have to come up with a different approach. And for the life of me, I just can't think of a different way to do it. But this concept of aging gracefully, like the amount of things that I used to absolutely love doing when I was younger, that I could do so easily, that when I've tried them when I was older, and for me, it's acrobatics. I could jump around and do flips and things that I learned in martial arts and through just playing around with my friends quite easily when I was younger. And about 3 or 4 years ago, I had another run at the mountain. I thought, my body's feeling good. I'm out of the army. I want to get back into this stuff. And I did a bunch of injuries. The worst one I probably did was, I can't remember the name of it, but I tore a part of the tendon and a part of the bone off one of my toes. It's just on the toe, but it was so painful. I couldn't do anything that involved any kind of impact for about 9 months afterwards. And I just made the decision. I thought to myself, is the risk versus the reward for this? And the answer for me was no. I'm getting older, and I thought there is so many cool things that I can still do if I just shift my priorities to a different area that I can excel in at my age that have a very low risk. And I made that decision. And I would argue, like, if this is really hurting you that much and it's causing you to do this, like the amount of work that I'm about to tell you that I think you have to do, I'd argue, like, is it worth it? Is it really worth you putting that much work into something? And maybe it is. Maybe it is worth it. And if it is, go for it. And the last thing that I was going to say, because I can see Phil's getting ready to chime in here, is generally when I've found that when you have an issue like this, like, definitely I'll just rest it and then get back into it is not the solution. That is not going to fix the problem for you. You're going to have to go back a little bit and really work on a lot of different strategies that Phil has identified, that I've put a few forward here, and build yourself up in strength, flexibility, mobility, dynamic stability work that Phil said to be able to get back to that point. But the solution is not going to come from I'm going to rest it and then I'm going to try doing the same thing again that caused the injury.
Just quickly before Phil dives in, I think we've got to tread very carefully with what Rad just said there. I've got Steve Cavana making a valid point. 42 is so young. Try 62. And we got
is Callum 42?
What's that? I don't even know how old Callum is, but we've got people like Vasco Barros in this gym at 64 or 66 who are doing muscle ups and things that they never would have thought possible at a young age. And the reality is that I don't agree with Rad at all in suggesting that you should give up at 40 years old doing the things that you love.
I never said you should give up. I never said that. I said risk versus reward and decide if it's worthwhile. And I'm not telling
you've got a guy there talking about doing side kicks. He's not trying to
23.
And he's 23.
Is he 23, is he?
At
Oh, there you go. Well,
yeah.
Jesus Christ. Get into it.
But even if you were 43, mate, I'd say get into it too.
Yeah. With groin pain, there are lots of different things that can cause groin pain. There are things that can happen from the actual groin muscles, so your adductors. It can be things that are happening in your pelvis. It can be hip related. So groin pain's a really tricky one, and it's not always caused by the actual groin muscles. So that's the kind of first thing. If you got to think about what is the driving cause of pain, and that's really hard to do unless you know a bit about it. So would recommend getting someone to professionally kind of work through it with you, because then you can really target your intervention. But having those big picture ideas about how you build things up is really key, and I think, at the age of 23, there's no reason why you can't. The one thing is with hips to keep in mind is that when you say you just can't do it on your left, there is something that does happen with people who are very athletic and people who have done sport throughout their whole life and people who have been kicking throughout their whole life, where you do actually get, as we'll talk about so much, like your body adapts to what you spend your time doing. So with that could be really productive ways, but sometimes it can be kind of frustrating ways where in people who've done a lot of sport, basically your hip can grow more bone, and it can make actual movements harder, because instead of having this clean ball and socket, you suddenly have a ball with different shapes in it. So there might just be that if you are trying to push these positions, similar to what Rad was doing with his internal rotation and injured his knee, because of this FAI, femoral stability impingement, there might be changes there that just make certain movements impossible, but it might just be because of a lack of control, lack of strength, lack of mobility. So that's why it is really hard to say do exactly this and it'll be better. But if you can figure out that driving cause, then...
And if your suggestion, my suggestion has always been that if you can continue to get a repetitive issue when you try something, then go and get an MRI and get it confirmed, and then just work around that. Don't say, okay,
yeah, I wouldn't even say get the MRI. There's a lot of this is clinical diagnosis. You ask questions and test things out and you find out. I think it's really important to say, with FAI, I've got it, Rad's got it, we've all got it because we've been doing sports throughout our whole life, and it doesn't mean that you can't do stuff. It just means that you've just got to be aware of your anatomy and what you.
A lot of really good martial artists can only kick high with one leg. I can't remember any of their names, but when I was obsessed with Kung Fu, there was a couple of China's best Kung Fu martial arts stars, and they could only kick with one leg, and they were unbelievable with that one leg. And you had to actually watch a couple of their movies before you realise that they never kicked high with the other leg. Yeah. They always just kicked with the one leg really high.
But this is the beauty of calisthenics, strength training, all of it. It's about learning your body, exploiting your body's strengths and learning to work around your weaknesses and limitations, and that's why it's always you versus you. Don't compare yourself to someone else. Callum, just work on what your best efforts are, and you'll produce amazing results. We get very caught up looking at someone we aspire to. It might be a mixed martial artist or a professional athlete, and then going, I want to be able to do exactly what he does. But it's going to be your body's best interpretation of that always, and just, really work on that. Really work on that.
Yep. Cool.
Steve Cavana is pointing out that he was talking about your age, 42, not Callum's age. I think from a macro standpoint, it's funny, I had a really interesting conversation with a friend of mine recently who was asking, of all the athletes in the world, who would you most like to work with? Who would you most like to coach? And we went down this path of talking about athletes and the way they train. And I even continued this with my friend out there doing the shoot with the AFL guys, about the progression of athletes, you got junior athletes who master a sport, and then a very small fraction of those move on to become professional in that sport, and they have generally quite a short life, and then after that they generally become fans or coaches in that sport. But a lot of them, by the time they're fans and coaches, are really broken because they've spent a large portion of their life focusing very heavily on specialization of that sport. And with specialization, Rad and I talk about this a lot, comes specificity issues and injuries, because the body doesn't really like just specializing in one thing. It kind of likes a little bit of variety, like strength, flexibility, and mobility. I like to say, if you're not an athlete, and it's very different for an athlete, because an athlete has to specialize in that sport. They have to get good at that sport. So their training is going to be very different. But this is what I brought up in my conversation with my colleagues the other day. Should everyone really be training like an athlete? Because if we know that specificity causes issues in the body, and you name me a professional athlete and I'll name you someone who has issues later on in life because of the amount of time they specialise in that sport. So for everybody else who isn't trying to master one sport, this is what Rad and my philosophy is. We should train like generalists, because we're trying to train in a way that provides us a foundation where we're good at everything, or that we can do everything well. We're not. We have the luxury of being able to train variety. We don't have to focus on one thing. And let me be absolutely clear, focusing on one thing, yes, you become a master at that thing. Well, some people become a master at that thing, and that's very rewarding, but it comes at a cost of everything else. And often it comes at a cost physically to your body. I'm friends with a lot of ex-athletes, and we've had the luxury of meeting a lot of them come through the gym, and they're usually medicated ex-athletes because they're in fucking pain, because their bodies are broken, because they've specialised their entire training life on this one thing, What do you think about that?
I really like the idea of a generalist, and I think it does. Again, human nature is such a challenging thing where you get really excited about one thing and that really drives you, and you just want to do that one thing over and over again. And like, as you said, the body doesn't love that, but the brain does. And I think it's that hard thing to... And it's something that I've really embraced, going from playing one sport all the time. I played 11 years of ultimate frisbee. If you haven't, I won't go into what it is, but if you haven't seen it, YouTube it, have a look. But I played, 5 World Championships. I played 11 years. That's all I did every weekend, and my body really copped it from doing that. And I've come out the other end, and I've found this whole joy in just being the ultimate generalist. I do triathlons, I play beach volleyball, I surf, I come to the gym, and I find a lot of joy in that. But I think if I'd done the 11 years of being really obsessed with one thing, and I think it is a really hard thing mentally to find passion in things you're not passionate about. But I just really recommend, from my experience, give it a go. Just try out something that you're terrible at and enjoy the experience of being bad, because every time you turn up, you get better at it.
Yeah,
and that's what I really love about being a generalist, is you get so much more tangible improvement. When you're just so specialised in one thing, it's you've just got to work for years and years and years to get percentage
Just
gains.
quickly before you run off this, now I'm speaking from experience. I did boxing for 16 years, and it really, my posture adapted to boxing, my body adapted to boxing, and I was okay at boxing. I was far from being a master of boxing, but it fucked me up. It messed up my shoulders. It prevented me from doing other things. And when time came that I wanted to be a bodybuilder, I wanted to do acrobatics, or I wanted to do calisthenics, it took me years of corrective exercise to be able to get myself back to a baseline where I could potentially learn how to do a handstand and do things like that. And I know you've had a similar experience.
Well, we've all been specialists, all three of us. And it is... without a doubt, it's one of the hardest things that you'll ever do in your life, is to give up on your specialisation. It is one of the hardest things. And I saw the pain you went through going through it, and I saw the pain you went through going through it, and I felt the pain myself, because you have worked so hard to get good at something, and to make a decision one day where you're I'm not going to pursue that anymore, and I'm just going to open myself up to all of this. It's so hard. And it's something that a lot of people never go through. And from what I've seen, this personal experience, what I've seen, the people that don't go through that, they suffer from it. Most often, there's always exceptions. I'm not talking about every single person, but people suffer from it. They suffer mentally and they suffer physically. But when you open your world up, you go through exactly what you just described. I went through the same thing. When all of a sudden when I'd made the decision that I was going to be a generalist, I was like, oh wow, I can do this now.
Yeah.
I'm allowed to do that. Because when you're a specialist, when I did Kung Fu, my teacher used to tell me, you have to practice your horse stance for 20 minutes a day. You have to do footwork for 40 minutes a day. You have to practice kicking for half an hour a day. You have to practice forms for an hour a day. You have to do the and I went, that's like 4 or 5 hours a day of work. And he said, do you want to be good? Or because you told me you want to be good. So you reject everything else. Like you used to say to me, man, you should do just like 40 minutes of weightlifting a day. You should see what it'll do for you. And I was like, I can't do that. I've got to do 5 hours of Kung Fu every day. And when I all of a sudden went, hey, I'm not going to do that, I was like, oh, wow, I can do a bit of weightlifting now and I can do a bit of calisthenics.
Well, when we used to box, I was only allowed to do strength training twice a week. And that was one strength session and one explosive session. And, and we did zero stretching. Zero flexibility work. There just wasn't time for it. And the reality is, like you have alluded to there, the moment you go, okay, but I want to do a bit of stretching or flexibility work, and we all had injuries. I mean, I ended up giving up boxing because I perforated my tricep tendon. I swung a punch, missed, and it literally split down the middle of my tricep tendon, And it was because my triceps were tight as hell, and they couldn't handle that ballistic locking out of the elbow. As soon as I missed the target, I was vulnerable, And so I argue I would have really benefited from some bloody flexibility work, And I trained with some of the best coaches in the country, someone who was in charge of the Australian Olympic boxing team for years, And so... Yes, moving from a specialist to a generalist for us, at least for me, is that now I work on strength and flexibility evenly, and I'm working on a little bit, not nearly as much cardio as I used to. I spent 16 years of my life pretty much doing all cardio, and I don't really enjoy it that much anymore. But we just have broadened the way we train, and we work on calisthenics and bodyweight training as much as we do, say, open and closed chain movements. And it's a bit different for Rad, a bit different for Richard, a little bit different for Phil, but we're just not specialising on a sport anymore.
But that's the beauty of the UMS, is that we all do our own version of it. Yeah. And it's just that at the foundation of it, there's strength and flexibility and cardio, but then you just tailor it to what you want to do and your purpose. Yeah. I think we're out of time, guys.
Yeah, to say, Callum has commented here saying, thanks, guys. Sound advice all around. Very surreal to have 3 guys on the other side of the world talking about my groin.
Too true. Hey, look, guys, smash up the likes on this stream if you enjoyed having Phil back. We'll do Physio Fridays again. Let's just keep this going. We got a couple of big announcements. We got Liz on the live stream. I'd like to give her a shout out. She's managing our merch, so we're launching a merch line finally. It's been a long time coming. And we're going to launch it with the Shut Up and Do Some Bloody Burpees t-shirts. So big shout out to Liz for managing that. Thank you very much. And also, this is going to change. I'm starting work on the rebuild of the studio this weekend.
That's
so
good
look
news,
out, watch this space.
I currently look like a tiny little mini person in the back here with the 2 behemoths at the front.
One of the big things is that we're going to have 3 camera angles, so that it's going to change that a little bit, and also the mics, and it's all gonna look a little. It's going to transform a bit next week.
And if you made it this far on YouTube, please go and download one of our blueprints: the Strength Blueprint, the Flexibility Blueprint, or the Nutrition Blueprint, where you can learn all about our program and how we get such astonishing results with our members. And come over and join the Facebook group called UMS Movement Mastermind. There's a link for all of that in the description of this video. That's the best way that you can connect with us and ask your own questions on these live shows.
And shout out to anyone who's listening on the podcast, Sound of Movement podcast. Phil will have this up afterwards. He's very passionately managing our podcast. Thank you very much.
Yep. Getting some views up, getting some listens up. So no, it's, thanks for everyone who's listening there. And exciting times.
Awesome, guys.
Good to be back.
This is Friday for us, so we're sounding off for the week, but we will be back stronger than ever on Monday. Make sure that you get the workouts done. Congratulations.
With some new microphones, Yanni? Are we going to be back?
No, the end of the week. The table's getting done next week, so we'll have it all together at the end of next week.
Okay, awesome. See you later, everyone.
Have a good weekend. Have a good weekend.
What's happening to
Health is about performance, not just body image.
You better be willing to accept what you're going to have to do to get there.
We'll start focusing on movement goals, strength goals, flexibility goals.
When you nail that skill, that's there forever.
The body image goal doesn't get you that far.
It's the consistency and frequency that's going to get you there. It's not the intensity.
There's no shortcuts to mastery and movement. Destination doesn't change overnight, but your direction will.
The gym is not the place to beat up the body that you hate. It's the place to build the body that you love.
We are the gym that teaches people how to move instead of just exercise, because we believe that health is about performance, not just body image.